Sergeant Jake Porter had always been a man of honor and discipline. He was a Marine sniper who had served his country bravely in dangerous places far from home. His job was not easy. He was trained to stay calm under pressure and make precise decisions in moments that could mean life or death. After months away, Jake had just returned to his quiet hometown. He was looking forward to seeing his family and finally relaxing after his long tour overseas. It was a bright, clear afternoon when Jake decided to run a few errands. He drove his dusty pickup truck slowly through the small town, enjoying the warm sunshine and the gentle breeze. As he drove, he thought about the simple things he missed: the taste of his mother's cooking, the sound of his daughter's laughter, and the peaceful quiet of home. Jake was ready to leave behind the harsh noises of gunfire and the endless tension of war. But fate had something else in store for him that day. As he approached a busy intersection, a police car flashed its lights behind him, signaling for him to pull over. Jake blinked, surprised. He wasn't speeding or breaking any laws. He carefully slowed down and parked on the side of the road. The police officer approached his truck with a serious look on his face. Jake rolled down the window and greeted him politely. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Jake asked calmly. The officer peered inside the truck and said, "License and registration, please." Jake handed over his documents. He had nothing to hide and wanted to cooperate fully. The officer typed on his radio, looking over Jake's papers, but after a moment, his expression changed. Something was wrong. "Sir, please step out of the vehicle," the officer said firmly. Jake's heart began to pound. He stepped out cautiously, asking, "Is there a problem, officer?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he called for backup, his voice tense. Within minutes, 2 more police cars arrived, and several officers surrounded Jake. Confused and alarmed, Jake kept his hands visible, trying to understand what was happening. Then an officer read out loud, "There is a warrant for your arrest, for possession of illegal weapons." Jake's eyes widened. "That's impossible. I'm a Marine sniper. I don't carry illegal weapons." The officers showed him a piece of paper that looked official, but Jake recognized something immediately. It was a mistake. Somehow the system had flagged him incorrectly. The warrant was for a man with the same name living in another state. But the police officers didn't listen. They handcuffed Jake tightly and led him to the patrol car. Jake was shocked. The rough grip of the handcuffs hurt his wrists, and the cold metal against his skin made him feel trapped and powerless. He tried to explain his situation, showing his military ID, his medals, even calling his commanding officer's number. But the officers were strict and skeptical. To them, he was just a suspect. The news spread quickly through the town. People who knew Jake as a hero from their own community were shocked and angry. Veterans who had served alongside him couldn't believe that one of their own was being treated like a criminal. Inside the police station, Jake sat alone in a holding cell, the cold walls closing in around him. He thought about his time in the Marines, the long nights on watch, the pressure to protect his team, and the sacrifices he had made. Now here he was, locked up for something he didn't do. His mind raced. How could this happen? How could a mistake like this ruin his reputation and his life? Hours passed, and Jake waited for someone to recognize the error. But no one came. The officers treated him like any other prisoner, ignoring his military background, ignoring the service he had given to his country. Outside the station, Jake's family was desperate. His wife tried to contact the police, pleading for answers. His young daughter didn't understand why her father hadn't come home. Friends and neighbors gathered, hoping to help, but the system seemed slow and uncaring. Meanwhile, the military was starting to hear rumors about what had happened. Veterans groups and local politicians began asking questions. They knew that Jake's treatment was unfair and needed to be fixed quickly. Despite the confusion and fear, Jake remained calm. He remembered his training to stay steady under pressure. He held on to hope that the truth would come out, and that he would be free soon. That day, the small town learned a hard lesson about mistakes, respect, and the importance of honoring those who serve. But for Jake Porter, it was just the beginning of a difficult fight to clear his name and reclaim his dignity. Jake Porter had never imagined that a normal morning would turn into one of the worst days of his life. The sun had just risen, and the sky was slowly turning blue when he stepped out of his small house, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie. He was going to get a cup of coffee from the diner down the street, something he did almost every morning. But that morning, things would be very different. Jake was a former Marine sniper. He had served multiple tours in war zones, carried out dangerous missions, and had saved many lives. He was known for his sharp focus, loyalty, and calm under pressure. His fellow Marines respected him, and his community saw him as a quiet, strong man who had done his duty for his country. As Jake walked to the diner, he didn't notice the black SUV parked near the curb. It was unmarked, and the windows were dark. Suddenly, the doors of the SUV opened, and several police officers stepped out, fast, serious, and holding weapons. Before Jake could react, he heard someone yell, "Hands where we can see them!" Etui. First, he thought there must have been a mistake. Maybe someone dangerous was nearby and the police were responding. But then, to his shock, he realized they were talking to him. He raised his hands slowly and calmly said, "I think you have the wrong person." But the police didn't listen. One of them ordered him to get on the ground. Another quickly moved in, grabbed his arms and pulled them behind his back. Cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. Jake didn't fight. He didn't argue. He stayed calm, even though inside, he was confused and deeply hurt. People from nearby shops and houses had come out to watch. Some held their phones and started filming. Jake, who had once worn a military uniform with pride and honor, was now being pushed into the back of a police car like a criminal. Inside the car, Jake asked again, "Can you at least tell me what I'm being arrested for?" One of the officers looked at a folder and said flatly, "Illegal weapons possession. Federal warrant." Jake was stunned. He didn't own any illegal weapons. Everything he had from his time in the military was either returned or properly documented. He had always followed the law, but the officer didn't care. To them, he was just another suspect. At the police station, Jake was booked like any other criminal. His fingerprints were taken. His picture was snapped. He was put in a holding cell with no explanation. Hours passed. Then more hours. No one came to talk to him. No one checked the facts. No one believed him. Meanwhile, news spread quickly. Some media outlets picked up the story of a former Marine arrested for weapons charges. The headlines didn't say it was a mistake. They didn't wait for the truth. They only repeated what the police had said. Online comments flooded in, some defending Jake, others calling him a danger. The damage to his name had already begun. Back home, Jake's wife, Emily, was terrified. She had no idea what was going on. Their daughter, just 10 years old, asked why Daddy was on the news in handcuffs. Emily's calls to the police went unanswered. Her heart broke not only for her husband, but also for the fear she saw in her daughter's eyes. Inside the cell, Jake sat silently. He thought about his service. He remembered the times he had risked his life to protect people he had never even met. And now, in his own country, he was being treated like he was dangerous, like he was a criminal. He wasn't angry yet. He was just stunned. He kept thinking, "This has to be a mistake. They'll realize it soon. They'll fix it," but no one came to apologize. No one came to check the facts. Jake wasn't just waiting for justice. He was stuck in a system that didn't care who he was or what he had done for his country. He was now just a name on a file, a case number, a man in a cell. The arrest shook the entire town. Some people who knew Jake personally were shocked and confused. "There's no way he did something like this," one neighbor said. Others weren't so sure. "You never really know someone," another person whispered. Back at the station, a junior officer finally began to question the arrest. He had served in the military too, and when he saw Jake's name and background, he felt something wasn't right. He looked into the file again, and what he found made his stomach twist. Jake Porter had been flagged because of a federal database error. The system had mixed him up with another man named Jake Porter, someone from a different state, with a history of illegal arms dealing. But the officer couldn't do anything. Once a federal warrant was issued, local police had to act on it, even if it was wrong. Still, he made a quiet call to someone he knew, Lisa Martinez, a military lawyer who had helped veterans before. She was shocked by what she heard and promised to look into it immediately. Inside the jail, Jake's second day felt even longer. He had been given plain food, a cold bed, and no updates. But he didn't lose control. Years of military training had taught him how to remain calm in chaos. Still, this kind of chaos was different. It was emotional. It was personal. Lisa, after checking Jake's records and comparing them with the real suspect's profile, quickly realized this was a serious mistake. She rushed to get Jake's military documents, his records, and character references. She also contacted the Department of Defense to alert them about the error. Meanwhile, Jake was taken to court for the first time. Still in handcuffs, still treated like a criminal. Reporters stood outside, flashing cameras in his face. His wife and daughter stood in the crowd, tears in their eyes. Jake tried not to meet their gaze. It was too painful. Inside the courtroom, the judge read the charges. Jake listened quietly. When asked how he pleaded, he replied calmly, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Lisa had made it in time and stood beside him, ready to defend him. She told. The judge there had been a mistake. She asked for time to gather more evidence. The judge, seeing the seriousness in her eyes and the lack of solid proof from the prosecution, agreed to delay the case. That gave Lisa time to act. She gathered support from fellow Marines, officers who had served with Jake, and community members who knew his character. She even reached out to a retired four-star general who had once led Jake's battalion during a major operation overseas. That general, deeply respected in military circles, promised to personally look into the case. He was shocked and angry that one of his best snipers had been humiliated this way. Jake spent another night in custody. This time, he started to feel something stronger, something he hadn't let himself feel before. Anger. Not wild anger, but quiet, powerful anger. Not just for himself, but for any veteran who had been forgotten, disrespected, or wrongly accused. He thought about the sacrifices he had made, the injuries he had seen, the friends he had buried, and now, all of that seemed invisible to the people who had handcuffed him on a sidewalk without even asking questions. He made a decision. If I get out of this, I won't stay silent. Not just for me, but for all of us. What had started as a shocking arrest was turning into something else. A fire had been lit. A mistake had been made. But Jake Porter wasn't going to let it define him. He was going to fight back, with truth, honor, and strength. And he wasn't alone anymore. The moment Jake Porter was arrested and handcuffed, it sent shockwaves through his community and the military world. But what happened next was even more important. The beginning of the investigation that would uncover the truth behind this terrible mistake. Jake sat in a small, cold holding cell. The days felt like weeks. His hands were sore from the handcuffs, but what hurt more was the feeling of being misunderstood and treated like a criminal when he was a hero. He kept thinking about his years of service, the sacrifices he made for his country, and how all of that seemed to disappear with just one wrongful arrest. But far away from the police station, a friend of Jake's from the Marine Corps was already taking action. This friend, Sergeant Lisa Martinez, was now a lawyer who specialized in helping veterans. When she heard about Jake's arrest through a call from his family, she didn't hesitate. She knew Jake well enough to believe something was very wrong. She decided to look deeper into the case. Lisa started by requesting all the police reports and paperwork related to Jake's arrest. She was shocked at what she found. The police officers were relying on a federal database that contained outdated and incorrect information. The system had flagged Jake's name because it matched someone else's, a person with the same name but a completely different identity, living in another state and with a criminal record for illegal weapons possession. It was a case of mistaken identity, but one with huge consequences. Lisa quickly realized this wasn't just a simple mix-up. The database errors were a sign of a bigger problem, a failure in communication between local law enforcement and federal agencies. Records weren't being updated properly and no one was double-checking before making arrests. She contacted the police department and tried to explain the mistake. At first, the officers were defensive and unwilling to admit fault. They said they were just following orders and protocols. But Lisa insisted that Jake deserved better treatment, given his military service and the clear evidence of the error. Meanwhile, news about Jake's situation began to spread beyond the town. Veterans groups, military organizations, and even local politicians heard about the wrongful arrest of a Marine sniper. They started calling for justice. Petitions were created online, asking for Jake's immediate release and for the government to fix the broken system. Inside the court, Jake appeared for his first hearing. He was still handcuffed, but his spirit was stronger now because he had support behind him. The judge was surprised when the prosecutor failed to provide clear evidence against Jake. The warrant seemed suspicious, and the judge decided to delay the case by 24 hours to allow for further investigation. This delay was a critical moment. It gave Lisa and her team the time they needed to dig deeper. They contacted the Department of Defense and military officials, demanding answers. They wanted to know how a decorated Marine could be treated like a dangerous criminal based on a mistake in a database. At the Department of Defense, officials were alarmed by the news. They realized this case could damage the reputation of the entire military. After all, how could the country honor its heroes if they were wrongly arrested and humiliated in public? A special team was formed to review Jake's case. They checked all his records, confirmed his service history, and verified that the weapons charges were false. The military leadership began coordinating with local law enforcement to clear Jake's name as quickly as possible. Back in the town, Jake's family and friends organized rallies and meetings to raise awareness. They wanted to make sure that the story did not fade away quietly. Many veterans came forward to share similar stories of frustration with the system. The community was growing louder, demanding change. Jake himself stayed strong through it all. He knew that getting angry wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on telling his story calmly and honestly whenever he had the chance. His dignity and courage inspired many people. After long hours of investigation, the truth finally began to shine through. The errors in the database were confirmed, and Jake's arrest was declared a mistake. The police department issued a statement admitting the wrongful arrest and promising to review their procedures to prevent future incidents. But the investigation didn't stop there. The military wanted to ensure that no other service member would suffer the same humiliation. They started working on improving the communication between federal and local law enforcement databases. Training programs were created to educate officers on how to handle cases involving military personnel respectfully and accurately. For Jake, the investigation was more than just clearing his name. It became a chance to help other veterans and change the system for the better. As the investigation came to a close, Jake was allowed to walk free from the courtroom without handcuffs. His dignity was restored, but the experience left a deep mark on him. He vowed to continue fighting for justice for all who serve. This case became a powerful example of how mistakes can happen, but also how courage, support, and determination can lead to truth and fairness. The day the courtroom was filled with tension and uncertainty, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change the course of the entire story forever. Sergeant Jake Porter had been through so much already, from being wrongly arrested to sitting in that courtroom, still handcuffed and waiting for justice. The room was packed with people, family members, lawyers, journalists, and the public, all watching closely. Many had come hoping to see Jake freed, but some still doubted what the outcome would be. The judge was just about to call the session to order when the courtroom door opened quietly. Everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance. No one was prepared for who walked in. It was a four-star general. The general's presence instantly brought a hush over the courtroom. Four-star generals were among the highest-ranking officers in the United States military. To see one walk into a local courtroom unannounced was unusual and surprising. The general moved with calm authority, his uniform neat, his medals shining under the courtroom lights. His face was serious, but there was a kind expression in his eyes, a mix of respect, concern, and determination. The judge glanced at the general and then nodded, motioning for him to approach. The general stepped forward and spoke clearly and firmly. He introduced himself and explained why he had come: to personally address the wrongful arrest of Sergeant Jake Porter. He began by acknowledging the mistake made by the police and the failure of the system that had led to Jake's handcuffing and detainment. The general explained that the military deeply respected and honored those who serve, especially someone like Jake, who had risked his life in combat to protect his country and his fellow soldiers. His words were not just empty apologies. They carried weight and sincerity because they came from the highest levels of the military. The general took full responsibility for the mistake on behalf of the Marine Corps. He expressed regret for the humiliation and pain Jake had suffered and assured the court that the military was working hard to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. The courtroom was silent. Jake sat still, his heart pounding, unsure of what to expect next. Then the general made a bold request. He asked the judge to immediately drop all charges against Jake and to order his release from custody. The general's presence and words left no room for doubt. He made it clear that Jake Porter was a hero, not a criminal. The judge listened carefully and then agreed. The charges were dismissed, and the handcuffs that had bound Jake's wrists were removed. For the first time in many days, Jake felt the weight of injustice lifting from his shoulders. Tears welled up in his eyes as the courtroom erupted in applause. The general walked over to Jake and shook his hand firmly, looking him in the eye with deep respect. He saluted him, a gesture that symbolized the highest honor among military members. Jake returned the salute, feeling a sense of pride and relief that words could not describe. After the court session ended, the general spoke privately with Jake and his family. He promised ongoing support and assured them that the military would do everything possible to restore Jake's reputation fully and to prevent similar incidents from happening to others. The media covered the story widely. The general's appearance and apology were seen as a rare moment of accountability and honor. People across the country praised the military's gesture and called for improvements in how veterans were treated by law enforcement. But the general's visit was more than just a public relations moment. It marked a turning point, a signal that the military was serious about protecting its own and correcting mistakes quickly. It also inspired Jake to speak out more about the challenges veterans face when they return home. In the weeks that followed, Jake began attending events and sharing his story to raise awareness about wrongful arrests and the need for better communication between the military and civilian authorities. He worked alongside the general and others to advocate for policies that would safeguard veterans' rights. The general's entrance in that courtroom was not just a dramatic scene. It was the start of a new chapter in Jake's life and in the relationship between veterans and the institutions meant to protect them. It showed that even when things go terribly wrong, respect, courage, and leadership can bring justice and healing. Jake never forgot that day. It was a moment when a high-ranking officer stood up for him, not just as a Marine, but as a man deserving dignity and fairness. The general's apology and support gave Jake hope, and a renewed sense of purpose to fight for the honor of every veteran who had served their country. After the dramatic courtroom scene where the four-star general had personally stepped in to apologize and clear his name, Sergeant Jake Porter finally felt the heavy weight of injustice begin to lift from his shoulders. The charges against him were dropped, and he was free at last. But freedom was only the beginning of his journey. The story that had started with handcuffs and humiliation was now evolving into something much deeper. A story of redemption, healing, and reflection. Jake returned home to his family, welcomed with open arms by his wife and daughter. The warmth of their embrace felt like sunlight breaking through the dark clouds that had hung over him for so many days. Yet even in the safety of his home, Jake knew that the experience had changed him forever. For Jake, the struggle was no longer just about clearing his name in the eyes of the law. It was about restoring his dignity and finding a way to make sense of what had happened. The wrongful arrest had shaken his trust in the system, but it had also strengthened his determination to help others avoid the same fate. News of Jake's release and the general's apology spread across the nation. Many people were moved by the story of a decorated Marine sniper being handcuffed and humiliated, only to be publicly honored and defended by one of the highest-ranking military officers. The media coverage painted Jake as a symbol of resilience, a man who had faced unfair treatment but had emerged stronger and more determined. Soon, Jake began receiving invitations to speak at veteran gatherings, community centers, and even government meetings. He shared his story honestly, describing the shock of his arrest and the pain of being misunderstood. But more importantly, he spoke about hope, justice, and the importance of respect for those who serve. At these events, Jake met other veterans who had faced similar struggles. Some had been wrongfully arrested, others had difficulties accessing the benefits they earned, and many felt forgotten once their military service ended. Jake listened carefully, realizing that his story was part of a larger problem affecting many people. Inspired by these conversations, Jake decided to become more than just a survivor of a wrongful arrest. He wanted to become an advocate for change. He began working with veteran organizations to push for reforms that would improve communication between military agencies and local law enforcement, ensuring that errors like his would not happen again. His efforts caught the attention of military leaders, including the four-star general who had stood by him in court. The general invited Jake to join a new advisory council focused on veteran affairs, a group tasked with making sure that the voices of those who served were heard at the highest levels of government. As a member of this council, Jake worked alongside other veterans, lawmakers, and officials to develop policies that improved veterans' access to justice and health care. He spoke openly about the need for better training for police officers on how to identify and treat veterans with respect and understanding. Throughout this process, Jake's personal healing continued. He spent time reflecting on his own journey, from the battlefield to the courtroom and beyond. He realized that his identity was not defined by a single moment of injustice, but by his courage to keep moving forward. One day, Jake visited the military base where he had trained as a young Marine. Walking through the familiar grounds, he felt a deep sense of pride. He remembered the friends he had lost, the battles he had fought, and the sacrifices made by countless service members. He understood that his story was one small thread in the fabric of a much larger community. Jake also reconnected with his fellow Marines, many of whom had supported him throughout his ordeal. Their friendship and solidarity reminded him that he was never truly alone. Despite the pain of his wrongful arrest, Jake found a new purpose in helping others. He began mentoring young veterans, offering guidance and support as they navigated the challenges of civilian life. He encouraged them to speak up for themselves and to seek help when needed. Jake's story became a beacon of hope for many, showing that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to find strength, dignity, and a chance to make a difference. In the years that followed, Jake continued his advocacy work, always remembering the day the general walked into that courtroom and changed everything. That moment had not only cleared his name, but had opened doors to new opportunities and a renewed commitment to serving his country in a different way. Jake never forgot the lessons he learned through his experience. He understood that respect and justice were not always guaranteed, even for those who had given their lives for their country. But he also believed that through courage, support, and leadership, real change was possible. His journey from being handcuffed and humiliated to being honored and respected became a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of standing up for what is right. Jake Porter's story was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It was about redemption, reflection, and the ongoing fight to make the world a better place for all veterans,